Hey everybody, it's Chad with Urban Dahlias. We are located in central Minnesota and we have growing zone 4A. So the one that we're dividing at this moment is going to be Allen's Hot Tamale. So I keep a tag when I dig them out of the ground. I always stick the tag in the stock. You can also work it in this way if you're looking for a way to keep your tag. And that way when you have multiple clumps out at a time, I normally dig between 2 and 4 clumps at a time, then go wash them off. This way you don't mix them up because at this point they're really not labeled. You really can't tell them apart unless you remember when you dug them up how the clump looked. So working on Allen's Hot Tamale. Well, this one here has 2 stalks. Sometimes I try to see if I can finesse them apart. It doesn't seem like that's going to happen very easy on this one. So then the first thing I normally do is I always sanitize my tools. I always have a towel and I just use disinfectant spray. Last couple of years this has worked just well. And I'll spray off all the tools. So I spray off all the tools that I'm going to use for the dividing process and then I just wipe them down just like this. And that just makes sure that all of your tools are sanitized. So if you're working on a clump that might have a disease, it's not going to carry over to your other stock. Some people dip their tools right in bleach solution. So first thing I do is I'm going to clean up all the hair roots just by using the scissors here because these are not going to be needed. It's going to grow the new hair roots next year when you plant it. So we go through and we remove all the hair roots. Then once that's done and it's cleaned up, I like to take a bird's eye view of it. And at this point I like to remove the stalk. It's not something you're going to keep. The next year's growing stock is going to be in a completely different spot. And the stalk has a lot of moisture. So if you don't get that part removed, you kind of run the risk of it rotting, and then it can take out the whole thing. So these lighter colored tubers, these are going to be the new growth, the new tubers. This is a little bit soft. So the mother tuber here, one that we planted, something either got into it or it rotted. It happened after the fact when the plant started growing. So first thing I normally do is I look at a way to remove that because we know we're not going to save in this scenario because it's all soft and rotted. So we'll get that guy out of the way. So now we're just looking at a clump of tubers that are this year's growth. They're all healthy, they all have strong necks. So the next thing I look at is what tubers do I want to keep with what eyes? Because you can, if you got the space, you can store it just like this. Unfortunately here at Urban Dahlias, we don't have the space to store something like this. What we're looking to do is we're looking to divide it up into doubles or singles, kind of like you see here. This one here is Moon Glow. We break it down so you can see the eyes. There's eyes right there. And this is a double. They're in singles too. So right there is the eye and a single tuber. This allows us to lay them flat. This is just the prepping totes so I can keep their names figured out. And then we can let them air dry for the 15 to 24 hours depending on how dry it is in the shop. And then when that's done, I throw some peat moss in here and I seal it up. And I always keep the tag in the bin. And then when every tuber is labeled individually, then I put the name on the outside. So these bins are only used during prepping in the fall and prepping in the spring. They come out of these big totes down here. I'll show you later. We have a big tote. I put down 1.5 inches of peat moss. I lay out the tubers so they're not touching. Put the peat moss back over the top. That allows us to store a lot of dahlias in a small space. So back to the dividing. We have this year's growth. And the best thing to do is if you don't know where to make that first cut, and you can't be afraid to cut the dahlia. Otherwise, you're never going to get divided. So there's always going to be some casualties when doing this. I normally look at things that probably won't survive. If it's smaller than a number 2 pencil, it probably won't survive the winter. I'll just snip this guy right here, right off, leaving its eyes intact so we could use it with a different tuber. This guy wants to naturally come apart, so we're gonna just naturally separate that guy. That was that original stock. When we removed the mother tuber, that's what was holding it together. So we have 2 tubers here and we have some eyes. So we could leave this just as one clump. Looking at the eyes, you want to make a cut. It's not going to compromise the fewest tubers and eyes as possible. So with our sanitized tools, I'm just going to lay this guy right on top here and then carefully cut it So we have two halves now. These guys are big enough, they're healthy. We're gonna keep those together, and then I'm gonna do a light cut that direction, a light cut in this direction, and we're gonna pop this guy off. He's small, but he has an eye, so he should still be very good and viable. We have a little bit of the original stock there that I don't need, so I'm gonna clean that up. We got a little bit of old tuber material on the back, so I'm gonna cut that off and throw it in the bin. So at this point, we can decide to leave this as a double, or we could divide it again. I see plenty of eyes there and an eye here. Bring it right between the clumps of eyes. Give it a snip with a sharp pair of snippers. You don't want to tear the tuber when you split it. You just want to cut it sharply. I'm going to clean up a little bit of the back side here. And now what we have to do is we have to allow these to air dry. We want the cuts to be air dried. Now depending on where you live, the temperature and how dry it is, it could take a couple hours. It could take a day, it could take 2 days. You want it to be dry to the touch. You don't want it to be wrinkling. You want it to have that nice, firm, hard texture of when it comes out of the ground. If it starts to wrinkle, if it starts to get soft, the best thing to do at that point is to get it in a tote with some peat moss for humidity. See if it's gonna bounce back. So we're gonna put these in a tote real quick. We'll move on to the next one.